Hello, I'm here with Bob Power, the illustrious uh, producer, engineer, arranger, musician, and I'm hoping to learn a little bit about one of the studios that we have here. Could you tell us where we are?
We are at the Clive Davis Institute's new 32,000 square foot state of the art facility in downtown Brooklyn. It's really, really amazing. I've been in the nicest studios in the world. I've never been in a place that's this cool with this many rooms that are this advanced and this many digital interconnects. Because the studio's new, we were able to utilize technologies that weren't even around 10 years ago, even though the fundamental basis of recording technology hasn't changed in 70 years. Um, we have four fully blown, full size recording rooms with double height ceilings in the center, which anybody who records knows that the ceiling height is a lot. It means a lot for the ambience of the recording. So the center of the rooms, I don't know how many square feet the rooms are. They're quite big. I would say those rooms, the footprint of those is 50 by 25 at least, and the center section is double height. We have four of those with four fully blown state of the art control rooms. Each one has a different console, which is sort of the focal point of the recording process in the studio is the console. And we have four different consoles, one in each room, each representing a sort of state of the art concept in a different way of going about the consoles. Now, to the average listener, they may not notice the difference, but in production, the sound of the console is a big part of the design of your production and helps you achieve your goals. Again, it's one of those little tiny things that by itself it doesn't make a huge difference, but when you add up all those little things, it makes a big difference. So each one of the four control rooms in the fully blown studios has a state of the art console by a different manufacturer that represents the sort of pinnacle of that design philosophy of that console. Now, they all do exactly the same thing, and they do it much in the same way. There are subtleties to the sonic characteristics of each console that many people find desirable for different kinds of music. Even though you can do any kind of music on any of them and it'll still be fine.
I see. So, can you tell us about this console that we're sitting in front of, and what are what is the setup like, and what should someone know?
Well, every console is the same in this way, that it has a bunch of channels that each can handle a discrete piece of audio, has a bunch of volume controls for each channel, so you can actually mix them together into what we perceive as a normal recording, even though you have control on the console over individual elements, each through its respective channel on the console or channel strip. Um, the functionality of them is all quite similar as well. Everybody looks at this and says, "Oh my God, there's so many knobs." Well, you know what? It's the same thing over and over and over again. There's 32 channels, so once you learn one channel, you know all of them. It looks like a lot of knobs. Um, at the bottom is the fader, which is a fancy volume control. It's a volume control that goes up and down instead of round and round. And again, you have discrete elements. This may be the guitar, this may be the bass, this may be something else. So you can mix them all together in a musically pleasing proportion. Um, all the consoles also have microphone preamps, which actually is what you can attribute a lot of the difference of the sound of the consoles and the mic preamp. So for recording, microphones put out an electrical signal. The signal level that the studio wants to see that all the pieces of gear are going to operate most efficiently, say it's the sound of my speaking voice right now. Well, compared to that, microphones put out a level about like this. Microphones put out a very, very, very low level electronic signal. So we needed a way to turn up that low level signal to a voltage level that the rest of the equipment in the studio can deal with. And that's what the mic preamps do. When I was younger, I always said, "Oh, well, you got to use a mic preamp," but I never really thought about what it was doing. And again, it's taking the very, very low level signal coming out of the microphone, raising it to a more robust electronic level that all the pieces of gear in the studio are calibrated to operate at most efficiently.
So, can you tell me a little bit about the preamp?
Sure. It's interesting that they put it at the top of the channel strip because the signal flows from there down through the rest of the strip. Uh, Conceptually, you can think about this console as here to do two things: record music and mix music. The mic preamp is what you use when you record the music. And again, you may have a bunch of different microphones on different instruments out on the floor in the live room. Each one comes into its respective preamp, which is where you raise the electronic level to a level that the rest of the equipment can deal with. And then the signal travels down the channel path here and ultimately out through the fader. Now, where it comes out is up to you. You can have it come through the main stereo bus so you can actually hear it like a piece of music, or via these bus buttons up here. And a bus you can think of as a master electronic highway that can come from anywhere and go to anywhere, and you tell it what to do. In this case, these numbers on the buses, these are again entrances to electronic highways. Those are what you use for the most part to send the signal coming in from the mic preamp to its respective input to the digital recorder. So bus 1 goes to input 1, bus 2 goes to input 3, and again, input 2. The fact that they call them buses is fairly irrelevant. You need to think of them as electronic highways that until you put something into it, nothing's in there, there's no cars in there, and it's going from this channel because it's hardwired into this channel, but then you send it to any one of these highways that you want.
So the mix in itself then is really taking that superhighway and directing that superhighway, or
Well,
how would you describe it?
the recording end and the mixing end are slightly different. On the record end, you're concerned with directing those signals to a discrete channel on the digital recorder. So if you have a mic on a singer, for example, you send it to its own track on the digital recorder so you can access just the sound of that voice and do with it what you want. Now, when you're done with all the recording is when you do the mix, which means that you take all those discrete elements and combine them once again into a musically pleasing and sonically pleasing combination. And when we do that, generally, the old school way of doing it is each one of these channels receives another track from the digital recorder containing a discrete piece of musical information: the kick drum, the snare drum, the hi-hat, the bass, the guitars, and you raise these things and create a pleasing musical and tonal balance via these faders, again, which are fancy volume controls, and it mixes it all together into a stereo mix, which you can then listen to on any one of your devices.
That's incredible. One of the studios you have here has a lot more speakers in it.
Yeah.
How does that different? What's the difference between that and this room?
That's the one that has me running for the hills. It's called Atmos. Over the years, there have been a number of multi-channel audio standards that people tried to get the record business to move over to. It hasn't really taken. We had 5.1 for a while, and you know, when you have a home theater setup now, you have 5.1 or 7.1 or 9.1, where you have a bunch of speakers around the room. Atmos is the current industry leader into multi-channel audio playback, and I believe that there are 128 discrete speakers in the room, which you can route any one of a number of you can route any of these sources to. So instead of the music coming out of two speakers sitting in front of you and just coming straight into your ears like this, the music comes from all over the room. I don't think mainstream records are ever going to be done that way, but in terms of media presentation, it's 2019. The music alone isn't so much of a big deal anymore. The music's usually connected with some other kind of media or digital presentation. So for that, I think the surround of the Atmos system is going to be quite something.
Exactly, for 360 immersive video.
Exactly. Can I walk around this thing? I'm amazed that it can see me wherever I'm in the room. I better not do anything bad because it's the eye of Sauron. It's always watching.
Absolutely. That said, again, let's take a quick break. And let's talk a little bit next about what this room is set up as. So, can you tell me a little bit about this room setup and how the console controls the speakers in this room, and what are things that a musician needs to understand about that interaction?
Well, first of all, the reason we have four speakers is there are two sets of two. They're big speakers and medium-sized speakers. The reason we have different sets of reference speakers is so we can hear how the music is going to sound on different size systems, period. They don't sound exactly the same, but that's the real world. No two speakers sound exactly the same unless you have a matched pair. What we do on the console and how we set up our mix of the musical elements with this louder than this, oh wait a minute, that's a little too loud, oh wait a second, the snare drum isn't bright enough, it sounds like this, let me turn up the treble control on the snare drum. So we mix through all these faders all of our discrete elements, and that comes out of only two channels. At that point, we're taking many channels and mixing them into two channels. And the funny thing is, you say two channels, it's like, no, I just listen to music. It all comes out of one thing. Well, no, it's left and right. And the way stereo works is you can place anything in that stereo spectrum. You can put it in the middle, you can put it on the left, you can put it on the right, anywhere in between. But fundamentally, it is two different streams of information that happen to be coming out together that we perceive in that stereo field. Like, oh, the hi-hat's over there. Oh, wow, I heard that guitar solo come out from that side. And we control that also with the pan pots here, which, you know, are fancy balance controls. Everybody's got a balance control on the stereo at home. Left side, right side. We can do that for each individual element here, and that combined with the fader, which controls how loud the thing is, lets us place something in the stereo spectrum, the stereo field.
You know, that's incredible. And I think about tracks like I Am I Be, where you put things all
Oh
around me
man,
and blew my mind.
that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Should I get into that?
I would love to talk about it in the perspective of what we have here in front of us.
Well, the intro to that song, it's a different story to tell. That was in an era where the technology was, compared to what we have today, extremely primitive. We were working on 24-track machines, meaning that we were working on the tape, and we could only have, in reality, 22 discrete pieces of information on that tape. So if we had a kick drum, snare drum, if we had a drum kit that was 6 channels already, bass, vocals, so we had to be very clever about the way we apportioned our materials to those 22 tracks of tape. I say 22, there were 24, but for technical reasons that aren't important, we couldn't use the last two.
So this system would have enabled you to create that in an easier way?
No, the system that's in that room and the digital recorder would have been easier because you have unlimited tracks where you can have discrete pieces of musical information on each one and manipulate it. For the intro to I Am I Be, we had all those voices coming out of that sort of imaginary sonic world, these heads suspended in space. We had to do that with samplers, and it took a couple of days to actually put that together. I worked for a couple days on something and I pressed the wrong button and lost it all and had to go about the whole thing again. But that was a fascinating concept in a record. I love that record for the fact that it was the first that I know of hip-hop confessional that wasn't in code speak. You know, the guys really said, hey, I'm a human being and these are the feelings I have, which up to that point people said that in more, and still do say it in oblique ways. But the guys, you know, great art is always terrifyingly honest, and those guys really pulled it off.
It's incredible, and again, I remember listening to it, and it blew my mind that with 2 speakers, I could hear all of that space the way you described it.
And it was like these heads suspended in space all over. This is called the center section or the monitor section. Fundamentally, all we do in this section is decide what we're going to listen to. Are we going to listen to this side of the board with all these faders coming in? Are we going to listen to my phone, which is hooked up to another cable? Are we going to listen to a CD? So this is where we choose what we're going to listen to, and here's the volume control. There's a bunch of other stuff on here, but it's not really that important. Now the patch bay gets interesting because the patch bay is where you can interrupt and send the signal from anywhere on the console to anywhere on the console. So we have cables, and I can take the output of this equalizer right here and plug it into this fader right here if I so choose. So we can route anything on the console to any place with hardwired cables, and it allows us more flexibility in the routing of the signal, again, all to achieve the sonic ends that we want, which is something that sounds like, wow, that's a really good sounding record. But again, this allows us to interconnect any of these components that look monolithic, but we can tap in or out of all these stages of this at any point.
You know, it seems overwhelming, but the way you describe it, you're making it very, very simple.
I believe in that.
It's so important. What would be the key to someone who is a young musician coming for the first time into an environment like this and being able to communicate well with you? What do you think the key things that they would need to understand about this space?
Breathe. Take a couple of deep breaths. You won't know everything you want to know really quickly, so you need to kind of relax with it and really, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a teacher, but really do your best to engage with what the teacher's saying. I have a thing in my class, and I don't teach them, we explore this material together, and I'll tell you, after 40 years, I still find it incredibly fascinating. So we explore it together. So what I would tell the student is, just be as engaged as I am while we're talking about this. When you get out of here, you can do whatever you want, you can mess around, but while we're here, stay engaged in this conversation, because that is what will ultimately give you the knowledge for you to get where you want to go, and theoretically the reason that you're here to begin with. And it's not like the old school thing where you be quiet and I talk, and be quiet and stare straight ahead. No, engage in this conversation we're having about this.
An engineer needs to be able to communicate well with the producer, but yet you do have some producers who are very engaged in what's going on in the console.
Most of my own productions, I ended up doing all the engineering and certainly the mixing, because a lot of times that's why people want to be around.
What is the key to creating the ideal mix for the client you're working with?
Knowing, as a mixer, you mean?
As an engineer,
Okay. Is really doing everything you can, bending over backwards to understand and try to realize the artist's vision. Period. Period. You got to bring your own thing to it, but ultimately it's not for you. It's for them to help realize their artistic vision.
and again, those are, you know, words of wisdom. Would you ever feel again? Uh, you know, be honest. Do you prefer to be the engineer, or do you prefer to be the producer?
Uh, I prefer to do the role that's going to help realize the music best. If it's one or the other of those, I'm down. You know, whatever's going to work best for the track. I will tell you, after producing and engineering a lot for much of my life, nowadays, which I don't really engineer for other people anymore, but when I do, it's fantastic because I get to just concentrate on that. I work with, you know, Michelle Ndegeocello is a dear friend and an incredible artist. I would follow her to the ends of the earth. I kind of have. But occasionally when she's doing a record, I'll engineer, which is fantastic, again, because after a lifetime of sort of directing the ship and doing this stuff at the same time, just having my hands on this and just concentrating in how the stuff sounds, not worrying about any other part of the big picture, is so incredibly satisfying and engaging. It's great. It's great.
Thank you so much, sir.